A.W. Tozer, theologian, biblical scholar, once said this: what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. So if you're contemplative, you hear that. You want to go out into the woods, you want to get alone, you want to really drill down into that. But here's where I would caution us if that's where you're at. If you do get alone with that thought, that can be pretty scary, because each of us have gone kind of off rail in life, haven't we? We've kind of gone down the path where it's like, I'm going to step outside of the boundaries God has for me, and we experimented a little bit with life. And so when something like that happens, what typically happens is we walk around feeling like there's a cloud following us, and it's a little gray cloud kind of raining on us because we feel a little bit guilty for the things that we've done, right? Like that we knew that something was there that wasn't right, and so it can get a little bit scary. And we're pretty sure at some point in our life, if you're like me, at some point in your walk with Jesus, you felt like you're disappointing God, haven't you? Like there's just times that come where I'm like, I think I'm disappointing God. And here's what happens in that space. That's what disobedience does, doesn't it? It just kind of causes, it's accusatory. There's an enemy, and he comes in and he's like, this is what you did, this is what you did. And so we take a beating on that. And sin, what happens is sin gets our attention, and then like a dummy, we kind of fall for it. We're just like, oh, and then something camps out in our head at some point thinking, like we're thinking that rebellion equals freedom. It happens for all of us. Like if I do this, there will be some freedom in it. And so we haul off down a path thinking that our way is the way, and what happens is we get into a tangle. Right? Some things start happening and life starts disintegrating, and this is exactly what is happening in the life of Jonah. So last week we opened up Jonah, and we just got through 3 verses, and what we heard in that was that the word of the Lord came to Jonah. And when the word of the Lord came to him, basically what was said is, I want you to go to the arch enemy over here. I want you to go into the desert and go talk to the Ninevites. I see what's going on in their world. I know what's going on in their heart. And what I want you to do is I want you to go point out to them, here's where they're off. And I want you to tell them that I want them to turn back to me. And so he launches out there, the word of the Lord is launched out to him. And so the prophet gets his marching orders, and what does he do? He goes AWOL, right? He's supposed to go 500 miles inland. Instead, what he does is he goes down to Joppa, which is a port city. He hops on a boat, and then, which we found out, like he's going 2,500 miles the other way. He's going to a port town called Tarshish, which is in modern-day Spain. It's like a beach resort. He's like, I could go inland to the desert, to the enemy, talk to people that won't like me, probably will want to kill me, don't want to hear what I have to say, or I could go to the beach resort. Kind of an easy choice, right? But he's a prophet. He got the word of the Lord, but still what he does is he goes AWOL and goes the exact opposite way. And what you can picture, at least I can, when I play this out, I'm thinking like, what must it have been like to be Jonah, where he gets out there on that boat and he kind of catches his breath just a little. And he's like, okay, I made it. The adrenaline kind of drops a little bit, and then the anchor's pulled, or they pull the rope off the dock, whichever it is, and then they start heading out to sea. And imagine what it must have been like for him to just kind of see Joppa in the distance there, just kind of fade away into the horizon, and something probably settled in the deepest parts of his soul, thinking like, I got away with it. I got away with it. Like I'm actually outside, like something is separating me from where I was supposed to go. And so probably there was still some tension there, because anytime there's disobedience, and if you've ever felt this, this would make sense, right? That anytime there's disobedience, there's some exhaustion that comes with that, isn't there? There's some mental exhaustion. There's some physical exhaustion. There's some emotional exhaustion. And certainly there's some spiritual exhaustion. That we're just like, oh man, I stepped in the wrong space. And so here's what we see going on with Jonah, that would have been some of what he must have been feeling like. So what does he do? He goes down into the boat, rolls out his mat, and he's just like, okay, I'm pretty wiped out here. I think I'm just going to take a nap. Take a nap, just kind of put all this behind me and move on. Probably thinking, all right, I think I made it out. I'm not sure what's going to happen next. And then we catch up with him, right? We catch up with him here. That's only 3 verses. that we covered last week. And so we'll cover the rest today. So Jonah 1, verse 4. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. Those three words right there, but the Lord, those are massive words. But the Lord, but the Lord, if you take those words out of the Bible, I'm not standing here. But the Lord came into my purview. He showed himself to me, revealed my sin. I should not be here, but for the Lord. But the Lord took a guy, a kid who had no God thought in his life, and he rescued me and totally changed the trajectory of my life. But the Lord continues to come alongside me in patience and mercy, in my stubbornness and my folly and my nonsense of what I do in life. But the Lord, those are massive words. And think about this for you. But the Lord has intervened in your life too, hasn't he? But for the grace of God, man, think about this for a second. Think about, how good is God that he would inject these words into our life tonight and remind us yet again of his grace and his mercy and his kindness towards us. And so before we go any further, man, let's just spend a moment with where you're at and think about, but the Lord, what has he rescued you from? What has he invited you into? What are some things that you can just look at, just how good he is, and just thank him for that? Just spend a moment with God. I'm going to be quiet up here. I'm going to give you just a few seconds here. But the Lord, just pause and thank him for his goodness in your life. It's good to remember. It's good to remember because, man, we get so busy. We get so busy and we forget. I'm a good forgetter. But, man, to pause and just to think, man, but the Lord has been so good. Now, the rest of this verse reveals something that I think sometimes can shock us as believers, because sometimes we think God's just like a, benevolent God, a great, oh, he would never do anything hard. Yeah, he does. So what does it say in verse 4? But the Lord, what did he do? Hurled a great wind upon the sea. There was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. Notice it doesn't say he allowed it. Doesn't say he worked with some weather pattern that was out there. No, he caused it. He's the one who got it going. And it's so bad that the ship is getting ready to break up. This is a God-sized storm that is intended to wake Jonah up, both figuratively and literally. He is getting Jonah's attention, hands down. While he may have thought, man, I fell asleep, I'm in the boat, I'm on my way, headed to the beach resort town, I'm going to eat some paella, and everything's going to be good. No, man, the ship is getting rocked. Here, verse 5. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God. And they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship and had lain down and was fast asleep. So the captain came and said to him, "What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us that we may not perish." Thunderbolts and lightning, very, very frightening. It's bad news. There's some stuff going on here. This is rough. When some crusty old sailors are scared, it's bad. This is bad. That if they're scared, not only are they so scared that they're crying out to their gods, because that guy over there is praying to a God, that guy over there is praying to a different God, this guy over here is praying to a different God, so it's here God, there God, everywhere God thing going on, and then all of a sudden they start chucking everything overboard too, because they're we got to lighten the load here because we're going to sink. Think about that. These guys are throwing aside their rations. This is what's going to keep them alive. Throwing aside the things that are going to pay the bills. They're throwing it all away. This is bad news. So when you have a professional sailor start to panic, you best be scared, right? Like, just think about that. I mean, this is rough stuff. But where's Jonah? Where is he at? Down below, taking a nap. As I was studying this, the original language, it implies that the reason the captain found Jonah is because he was snoring. He was so fast asleep, so knocked out here, so comfortable in his disobedience that he's completely sacked out, as all the sailors are panicking. I've been on a cruise. A few years back, me and Gina went on a cruise to Alaska. Man, we woke up on the way back somewhere out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and we're bobbing around in the bed. And then the captain gets on the intercom the next day, and he's like, that's like the roughest seas we've ever been in. And I'm just like, man, you got this 1,000-foot boat bobbing around like a dinghy out in the ocean. That's what's going on here, and that's scary, right? So the professional sailors are really going through it. Jonah, asleep. Totally wasn't even feeling it. And there's a couple things in here that, as I was just processing through, there's a ton of things in here, but here's a couple things that I think we need to process tonight. First, notice that Jonah's running, and in his running, he intersects with these people. And so when his life intersects with these people, his disobedience isn't just his disobedience anymore. His sin and disobedience now affects other people. And it has collateral damage. And that's what sin does, doesn't it? We might think, oh, this is just about me and God. But it has its tentacles over into other people's lives. And so here they are in this space, disobedience, like, man, it is affecting other people. And so we just finished a series not too long ago where it was the series that's called Disciple. We were talking about the rhythms of a follower of Jesus. And in that, we said this repeated over and over and over, that we reproduce who we are. And so as we think about like the way that we take the truth of this book and live it out, so when it says to do something and then we live out there, when we walk out those doors, if our life is incongruent with what is in here, then people see that and they're affected by that. Our sin and our disobedience has a long reach into other people's spheres of influence, right? Like, so it begins to touch lives that we may otherwise thought, no, it won't bother them, won't bother. This is between me and God. Oh, no, it affects people. So, like, think about this. In the Bible, it tells us in Hebrews, do not give up the habit of meeting together. So this is supposed to be a regular occurrence. So if we don't, at the beginning of the day, decide, like, okay, this week I've got this much budget of my life, and I got to make sure that I'm in community with other believers, that I cut away time to make sure that I'm in the gathering where I'm worshiping together with other believers, where I'm being reminded of the truth of the gospel, of who Jesus is and all that he has done to rescue us and call us into his family and then send us out on mission. I need to be reminded of that. And so if we kind of fudge on that and go, I don't know, like we got to budget that into our life, because if we don't, and it just becomes a casual thing, think about how that affects people. Like mom and dad, if the kids see that, then all of a sudden that becomes a generational thing. It's like, when I grew up, and my family kind of went like 50%, so it was a big deal. But I mean, let's not get too crazy here, right? So or your friends, or maybe your extended family, or your neighbors, or people you work with. We say we believe this, but then how does it affect our life? Or how about this one? In Mark chapter 10, we look at the words of Jesus. Mark 10:45 tells us, "For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." And so a lot of times we can come and think about serving the cause of Christ like entering into kingdom activity and say, well, I'll do it, but only if it's convenient. Like I can't really make a sacrifice for that because I got all this other stuff going on over there, and I get it. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of plates we got to spin. But again, it's like looking at the budget of our life and saying, okay, God, what have you entrusted to me to advance the cause of your kingdom here in our world? Like, what part do you want me to play? And if we don't take that seriously, again, think of the people in our spheres of influence. If our life is incongruent with what we see here, they're going to go, I don't know, it affects. other people. Or, when it comes to money, if we don't bring our first and our best, a lot of people are like, oh, well, like we can trust in a green tinted piece of paper instead of God, instead of placing our faith in Him. And so if we don't think about that, how's the needle of generosity going to affect generations that come from here? You see, our issue here with Jonah, that we keep bumping into with Jonah, it's our issue too, isn't it? It's like, this is us. This is us. I said it before, I'll say it again. We are educated beyond our level of obedience, aren't we? Like we know that we know stuff. And so we're continually reminded of it as we spend time in the Bible, and it's so easy to just kind of keep that at arm's length and go, I don't know about that, And so what happens is we're doing exactly what Jonah does. We take what we know to be true and we run the other way in disobedience. And it affects us, it affects those around us, and it unnecessarily complicates things, doesn't it? I guess it's been that way in my life. I know I've seen that for sure. So we see that because Jonah is in disobedience, he's walking in sin, that we see that affects people. But there's also something else. Did you notice how many times in these first verses, how many times we've heard the word down? How many times does down happen? Like over and over, right? He keeps going down. He goes down to Joppa. He goes down into the ship. We're going to read later that he goes down into the sea, because that's the trajectory that disobedience takes us on. We're going down. It's not up. It's not the right way. And so what happens a lot of time is I think about when I've tempted and then I step into sin. Initially, when I engage in that sin, it kind of feels good, right? It might feel like, oh yeah, this isn't so bad. And it's like you made a deposit where you won the jackpot and you put the deposit in your bank and you're like, this is awesome. But only to realize that as that disobedience begins to take root, it begins to take a withdrawal out of our life and we're left bankrupt. Rapidly reveals that to us because sin does this. And we've all experienced this. We all know this, but let me just be the friendly reminder guy. Sin always overpromises and underdelivers. Always. Doesn't it? It's like, hey, you could have, you could be, you could go, you could have. This is the promise. And it underdelivers every single time. And we keep playing the fool and taking the bait. Verse 6 is sounding the alarm. Here's this pagan seafaring captain comes and goes to the prophet of God. And he's like, what do you mean, you sleeper? Get up, arise, call out to your God. And perhaps today that we will be rescued. Perhaps today we could experience obedience. And that's an everyday occurrence for us, right? We're faced with a temptation. We're faced with an opportunity to sin. And that's where we move in and we turn away from that. We repent, we believe, we follow. We repent, we believe, we follow. That's how we came to faith. That's how our faith is sustained. And that's how it's going to be in the future. We turn away from that sin. We turn back to God and we lay it at His feet. And we say, here, Jesus, you can have it all. This is what I did. This is what I thought. This is what I think. It's wrong. And I want you to capture more of my heart. And in the Spirit of God, He begins to shape you and form you into more Christ-likeness. He moves us that way. And that's how we move forward. And so here we see that. Man, the captain's like, hey, get up, man. What are you doing? Call out to your God. Now, on to verse 7. And then they said to one another, come, let us cast lots that we may know on whose account this evil has come to us. So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. What's your occupation? It's kind of the first one. Like, what do you do? Where are you from? How long you live here, right? So what's your occupation? Where do you come from? What's your country? What people are you? And he said to them, I'm a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Then the men were exceedingly afraid, said to him, what is this you've done? For the men knew he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord because he had told them. Then they said to him, what shall we do? That the sea may quiet down for us. The sea grew more and more tempestuous. Then he said, just pick me up, hurl me into the sea. Then the sea will quiet down for you, for I know because of me that this tempest has come upon you. Here's what's so crazy. Again, these are polytheists. Notice, they're praying, he's praying, they're praying, like all kinds of prayers going up here. They're just trying to throw a dart at the, maybe we'll hit a God here, and then they come to Jonah and they're like, hey, you pray too, man. Like, who are you? Well, the Hebrews were the only monotheists. They're it. Like, and so here he's going like, I worship the God that's kind of responsible for all this that we're facing here. Like, he goes on record. He's like, yeah, I'm a Hebrew, so the God I worship, he's got all this on lock right here. Like, he knows what's going on. And so here's what's crazy. Jonah is believing in the God who has command over all that, yet look at what he's doing. Look at what he's doing here, right? Just another picture of what I just said. You can believe stuff all day long, right? We can believe stuff all day and still not do it. Still not do it. It doesn't affect. We got head knowledge for days. But if it doesn't drift to our heart, and when it settles deep in our soul, that's where the overflow comes from. That's where transformation happens, where we submit that to God. We can believe it all day long. Jonah's a prime example of being educated beyond his level of obedience, because here's what the sailors are doing. They played Yahtzee. They're like, if I roll Yahtzee, it's Jonah. If I don't, then it's this guy. So they're playing with dice. Even God is sovereign over the roll of a dice, because they roll the dice and it's like, Jonah, it's you, man. God's sovereign over every little turn of a dice. That's how amazing this is. And so they're playing Yahtzee. Jonah's to blame. And then they ask him, what are we supposed to do, man? Like, how are we going to get out of this mess? How's this going to change for us? And he just says, man, just chuck me overboard. Just toss me overboard and this will all go away. Why? Why did he say that? Some commentators have said it's like, well, it just was kind of a fatalist approach. But it doesn't match what the Hebrews would have believed. This is a prophet. He understands the ways of God. He understands that God is sovereign. I'm guessing, based on some of the other research that I put into this, I think he thinks this is it. God is sovereign over all of it, and this is the way it's going to go. So he's just like, well, I did disobey. I thought I got away, but apparently I didn't get there fast enough, because this storm's here, and if you just toss me overboard, that'll be the end of it, and everything will be okay for you guys. Probably just felt like this is the end of the disobedience train, right? Like, that's it. Still, but notice, he's still not resolved to go to Nineveh, is he? Nowhere in there is he like, okay, God, you got me. I'll go. You got me. Like, he doesn't say that, does he? It's like, toss me overboard. I'm still not going. I'm still not going. I'm not going to those people. I would rather die. That's crazy to me. So resolved to not go there, thinking this is the end of the road. Verse 13, nevertheless, the men rowed hard to get back to dry land, but they could not, for the sea grew more and more tempestuous against them. These guys are helping him out. They're like, man, we'll row you back to shore. Like, they're not even part of his crew, and they're like, we're trying to help you out, man. Like, we're going to get you back to dry land. I know it's rough, but we'll do all that we can. The boat's not moving. It's still rough. It's still bad. And then, therefore, they called out in verse 14. They called out to the Lord, the sailors. These are the sailors. Therefore, they called out to the Lord, O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not on us innocent blood, for you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you. So they picked up Jonah, hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. This is mind-blowing. This goes right from those first three words out of verse 4, but the Lord. This is God's activity moving things along. But the Lord, right? He intervenes, and in the midst of Jonah's rebellion, God rescues these crusty old sailors that had no idea who the real God of the universe was. And now they do. So even in Jonah's rebellion, God rescues. Because what we see, this is just this is a microcosm of his calling. The word of the Lord came to him to go to Nineveh, where his life would matter for the lives of the Ninevites who were far from God. Go tell them, I know. Tell them I see. Tell them I want them back. Like I want them to be in relationship with me. That's what we go to verse 9 of chapter 2. This is a central verse of the entire book. Salvation belongs to the Lord. It's His work. He's sending and guiding and doing things that are complete sovereign control here. And these verses blow me away because, but the Lord shows up. And when we see these unbelieving, pagan, polytheistic, crusty old sailors out-faith the prophet, that ought to throw up a flag and go, what? Like these guys, they were polytheistic. God, different God, different God, different God. Who are you? Hebrew. Oh. And then they see that he's in charge of it. And what do they say? Therefore, they called out to the Lord. They obeyed. They were seeking God. Jonah? No, it doesn't say that he did that. He's not pushing in that way. He's not pressing into God. So then you go back to verse 14, and it says, we don't want to perish for this guy, and we don't want to have innocent blood on our hands, for you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you. You see these sailors, they're kind of backing away from Jonah. He said to throw him in, but he's the guy who said he's following you as God, and if you're in charge of all this, and we take the guy you sent to go wherever, but we know he's running away from you, but we don't want to throw him overboard. Then you'll be really mad, and I don't know where this is going to go. And so they're like, we don't want to have innocent blood on our hands. We don't want to just, make you upset. Jonah? Not so much. And remember how clear his calling was. Arise, get up, go to Nineveh, and tell them that I know what's going on. Very clear cut, very clear path. And they didn't do it. He has clarity, and he runs. The sailors, they readily submit after playing Yahtzee. One time, good, here he is. And then they throw him overboard, everything's clean. All right, it's like, whoa, this is amazing. They toss him over, the sea calms down. What's their response? Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. Their response is worship. They saw God for who He is. They were readily engaged to worship, because that's where obedience leads us, doesn't it? When we obey God as He reveals His will and way, when we obey that, the natural response is that we worship Him. That we want to engage even deeper because we see Him for who He is. That He is holy, set apart, good, right, perfect, excellent, praiseworthy, all of that. And it's just like, yeah, I want more of that. That's a response of worship. And here's a principle that I heard a pastor say. He said this. He said, sometimes God uses people to accomplish tasks. But more often than that, God uses tasks to accomplish people. Isn't that true? Like how many times, like this is certainly the case. Like we're going to go out, God's going to tell us some things, like it's going to be like, yeah, engage, here's what it looks like to obey, and we will go and we will do that. Like He will send us out to accomplish tasks, no doubt. But how many situations in your life, how many circumstances, how many difficulties, how many good things, how many things that have happened in the span of your years have happened, and it has formed you to be more like Jesus? Because He uses things to shape us, direct us, to move us along, to get us to where He wants us to be. He uses tasks to accomplish people. Because the people of God is the heart of God. It's not just what we can do for Him. And a lot of times we get mixed up with that. It's like, oh, well, I got to obey because if I don't, then that won't. Oh, God can do that without us. Don't think you're that big and powerful and necessary, right? And we're just not. Now, He invites us in. We get to be a part of it, but that's an opportunity that He is going to use us, but it's for His glory and for good. And it's our joy that we get to participate in that. But it's not because He needs us, but He does invite us in. He does give us the opportunity to participate in something that matters forever. And so we see the sailors, they were far from God, engaged in a worship gathering, And they just had their first failed baptism because Jonah didn't get back up on the boat. You know, I'm thankful for the new covenant. We don't like it when the time comes for our first baptism. We're going to bring them back up. Okay, that's the plan. But see, here's what's crazy. Jonah is getting ready to have a worship experience of his own. He's going to experience the grace of God again in an unmistakable way. Verse 17 takes us there. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Could this really happen? No. It's called a miracle for a reason, guys. It's like this is not everyday occurrence. But here's what's crazy. The big miracle is not that Jonah was alive in the belly of a fish for 3 days. That's not the big take home here. The big take home, as we'll see next week as we dive into chapter 2, the big miracle wasn't that he was in a fish for 3 days. The big miracle is the change in Jonah's heart. Because circumstances can change. The heart, aside from God moving, it will not change. We will not change anybody's heart. That's God's work. Now, he sends us out to speak truth. Now, Jonah wasn't responsible for changing the Ninevites' heart. He was just responsible to go and tell. He was sent on mission to be an ambassador of reconciliation, as the Bible tells us that we are. Here he is on a boat bobbing out in the Mediterranean, and God sent him there, and he was used by God to point to the good God that he is, right? So God used his life to point people to him. And so the heart, though, Jonah didn't change anybody's heart. God did that. God does that heavy lifting. And he uses us to go and speak truth because it's in the heart change that God's going to get maximum glory. That's where it's going to happen. So here's what we've done in chapter 1. We've kind of pulled back the curtain just a little bit. Got to see some behind-the-scenes stuff in a story that's very familiar. Kids know it. You know, people who've been in church a while know it. As we study it, we're going to have a firm grasp on this. It's a historical account that explores the mission of God. It explores rebellion, running, rescue, lots of unexpected twists and turns. And there's so much in here, even today. I think we've seen ourselves in this story. It's like, that's a little bit like me. There are some things in our lives. There's some things that God has said. There's some things that we know God is leading us in. And I don't know what it's like for you in your life, but he's constantly moving. He's constantly inviting us in to join him in his work. And if he's here and we're here and he woos us to this place of ministry, sometimes we do act like Jonah, don't we? And we're like, I don't know about that. Maybe I misread that. Or I don't know if I could go there, if I'm supposed to do or be or go, whatever. There are things in our life that we know God has clearly spoken, and now the opportunity is there to obey or to do what Jonah did and to disobey. And so I think the question that I want to leave you with tonight is this: am I like Jonah? Or where in my life am I like Jonah? And how can you submit that to God? Don't be afraid of him and shun him and go, I got to go over here and I'm going to fix it. I'm going to make it all right. I'm going to try harder. I'm going to read my Bible. I'm going to pray. I'm going to be good enough so I can come back to God and I can say, okay, I figured it out. Like I'm better now. We're good, right? No, the gospel invites us in. That in our disobedience, in our sin, we don't run. That's a misunderstanding of the gospel. The gospel is that Jesus has done. He's paid the price. We don't have to earn favor. He invites us in. He welcomes us in and he says, tell me, bring it to me, reveal that to me, confess that to me, and let him change you. Let him lead you into obedience. That's the joy of following a good God like we have in the Bible. It's not up to us to figure it out. It's up to us to obey as he leads us, though. And that's going to be a work of the Spirit of God who shapes you and forms you into Christ-likeness. Not because you're over here trying the good stuff. Now, You're probably not going to advance if you don't read your Bible, pray. And like those are things that God will use to help you abide with him. But it's not because you do those things that you earn favor with him. He invites you in to know him. So I would ask you, am I like Jonah? Where in your life are you like Jonah, and how can you submit that to God? That's Jonah chapter 1. Let me pray for us, and then just a couple more things, and we will roll out this evening. Jesus, so much in here. So many things that are so familiar to me, so familiar to us. It's stuff that we can't change on our own. It's stuff that we know. We've got disobedience in our life. We know it. We've done it. We're doing it. We'll do it again. But I'm thankful that you don't leave us kind of out there floundering, trying to figure it all out, but that you invite us into relationship, that you bring us into a space where we can walk with you. We can hear your heart. We can walk with you and know that where you're leading us is good. It's for our best, and it's for your glory, which means it's going to matter forever. And so there's a lot of things that are going to come across our radar. We're not going to understand it. It's not going to make sense. A plus B is not going to be C. But it's going to be something that you call us out in. And it's going to take faith. And it's going to feel shaky at times. It's going to feel like it doesn't make sense. And so I pray that you would bolster us with faith. You would give us the mind of Christ because of what we know to be true in your word. And that we would have a deeper, more abiding faith in the very core of who we are, so that what you call us out in to do and be, that we know it's not left to us, but that we're walking with a powerful God who is sovereign over dice and sovereign over tempestuous seas, sovereign over people who are far, far from him. And that you work in mighty ways and invite us into spaces that help us to walk with and know you more. So God, I pray in these next moments that we would just think through a little bit of where we are, what's going on in our heart, and where we're like Jonah, and where you're calling us to obedience. So I just want to leave you for a moment. Just take the next minute and just think about where are you like Jonah? Where are you running from God? And where is he calling you back to come and to walk with him and know him and experience a great journey that accomplishes things that are far beyond anything that you could ever do